We are going to have a conversation about the term housing bubble, and we're going to talk about the affordability crisis. One of these words makes me uncomfortable, and one of them I agree with wholeheartedly. And have this conversation, we're going to bring on the one and only Anna Kelly. How you doing, Anna?
Good. Great to be here, Michael. I like this topic.
Yeah, there you go. So I will actually give you a chance to react before I kind of tilt the field. When I say the word housing bubble or affordability crisis, does one hit you more or less than the other? Does What do you think of those two terms?
Absolutely. Yeah. We clearly have a housing affordability crisis. I don't like the word bubble because bubble means it's going to pop. Bubble could mean crazed, fear mongering kind of term. And it really isn't extremely helpful. Are we in a housing bubble? If that means that prices are elevated and they're going to pop, maybe the bubble's already popping a little bit, but it also makes you think that prices are going to crash. And we may not have prices crash, although we clearly do have a housing affordability crisis, or the price to own a home and have a mortgage is substantially elevated versus the wages that underlie those mortgages. And so the home to wage ratio is definitely elevated. So I like that term better.
Yeah, so I agree explicitly, right? The term housing bubble took off obviously because of what happened in '06, '08, and the aftermath,
Yes.
right? That was clearly a bubble. And the reason I don't like housing bubble is, again, most people hear that and they translate it to it popping, right? Bubbles just
Right.
pop. And what I've been trying to tell people the last year is, sure, that's one outcome for the housing market. I would propose, and my 52-year spreadsheet, soon to be 53-year spreadsheet, shows you that most of the time, housing is more like a balloon where it just deflates slowly at different times, right? And there is no sexy term for that. People really hate to hear that. The housing market is going to slowly move, right? It's price inelastic. And they just hate that. They all want it to just pop and just all this pain and bloodshed because they're all going to come in and buy again, which they won't because they'll all be scared just like last time. So that's why I hate the term housing bubble, because it does two things. One is it creates imagery that's recent that I think is unlikely, not impossible, but unlikely. And it gives people permission to do nothing. That is what really worries me about the housing bubble. So does that all that make sense?
It does. It does. Because if you think that you're in a housing bubble that's going to pop, you're not going to buy. You're just going to say,
Yeah.
let's wait till it's completely done popping. And it's hard to really time that exactly, as we talked about, in the first video today. It also means that you think that they're going to come down substantially. And it's
Yeah.
rare that housing prices come down really substantially, especially in a generally flat economy that's slightly has slight growth. Let's say it's 2%, 3% per year growth. You're generally not going to have a situation where there's mass layoffs so broad in the country that people are going to have to sell their home. And yes, we had a housing bubble, in 2006, 2007, leading up to 2008, 2009, but we had mortgages that were very unbalanced. They were high rates compared to where wages were. And it's the mortgage market and the rates, the variable interest rates that really popped. Now we have this situation where over 80% of mortgages are sub 4% fixed. So most people can afford to stay in their homes. So you're not going to have this mass swath of sellers, this mass amount of inventory that creates so much supply with very little demand that forces values everywhere to really pop and that bubble to pop. We just don't have the economic underlying fundamentals that would cause that kind of thing. We've really got a fairly stable mortgage market, fairly stable interest rates on 80% of loans. So I don't think you're going to have this big increase of supply that's really needed in order for that bubble to pop.
Yeah. Kind of the last thing about the last one, which was absolutely a bubble. People don't really understand. People who didn't go through it and they only look at charts, they don't understand the toxicity of the mortgage created. So let's just give one example. There was actually a type of mortgage where the first 2 years were at an artificially low rate, 1.9%. Some of them were
Yes.
0.9%, just ridiculously low. And then after 2 years, they reset to many times over 9%. But here's where that broke. The applicant was approved at the 2-year artificially low rate,
Yes.
not at the fully burdened 28-year, right? 2 minus 30 is 28 remaining years at the 9%, because the going concern was people will just refi. That is
Yes.
not, that is now illegal. You must approve a borrower at the highest rate the loan can go to.
Yes.
And that is a lot of the cause. And when people say rates were high, higher than or whatever, that's just, it might be right on a chart, but you were not in the game. Like
Right.
23% of loans originated in '06 were this toxic pick a payment, horrible underwriting, had to blow up loan. It's just what
Right.
it was.
The issues that we have today in commercial real estate, where we have rates that aren't fixed for 30 years, that have these variable terms with a rate maybe fixed 2 to 5 years, that's the same kind of situation that we were dealing with residential loans, and a huge
Agreed.
percentage of those. And so, if you can't cover the debt service once you increase that price, and your price values are starting to come down a little bit because a lot of people are having the same problem and a lot of inventory is coming on the market, you really can't refi a home that's worth less and get into a rate that's generally stable. And so that kind of thing created a true housing bubble, where this is just, a situation where we had a lot of demand. It drove up prices, like typically happens near the peak. And now we have a lack of demand, but we also have a huge lack of supply. And so that keeps prices at least elevated. Again, in some markets where you had massive increases, 50% increases in a year or two, that's starting to pull back. In those areas that went really boomed quickly, they usually bust pretty quickly. But for most of the market, it's been a very stable increase, and it's just slowing down. Prices are not really falling, transactions are falling. So maybe we're in a transaction bubble, if you want to call it, but I would not say we're in a housing price bubble for sure. So I agree with you on this one.
Yeah. So let's talk about affordability crisis, because I agree with this and have pointed at it many times. Again, my 52-year spreadsheet shows that 2022 was the second least affordable year for housing. I think only 1980 was worse. So I get it. It absolutely is. You can show me all the charts in the word about household, average income to this, to that. But again, this goes back to affordability crisis. There are many ways to fix that. Everybody wants to equate housing bubble with affordability crisis, and I don't see them as connected. They're separate paragraphs, if not separate books, not same sentence. And the
Explain
affordability,
that to me. Explain what you mean by that, Michael.
a lot of people that I hear talk about affordability crisis say we're in affordability crisis and it's a housing bubble. The only way to get the affordability crisis fixed is for bubble to pop. And I'm like, no, that's just not true. That's just not true. So
Yeah,
one of the
I
ways
see
to
what you're
fix,
saying, because there's many different inputs, right? So when we
yeah,
talk about affordability, we talk about what is the payment every month compared to
compared
where the
to
wages are. And the payment
exactly,
is basically a fundamental of both the price that you pay and the interest rate, right? And then what type
exactly,
of loan term you have. And then there's wages. And so price only takes up, I think what you're saying, it's 1/3 of the component, but there can also be adjustments downward of the interest rate again, and there could be
exactly.
adjustments upward of the wages, and both of those would take care of affordability as well. So
Yes,
it is really important to understand, if you want to figure out whether an investment is a good investment and it's affordable, whether it'll cash flow, whether your home might be, is you need to look in those markets, and in addition to learning the rents and the values in a market, learn what the wages are, and learn what kind of interest rates are available. And if you can play with those things and you can see that it's more affordable than other areas because of better wages, for example, then that could be a great area to invest in. But yeah, to your point, there's a lot of things we can do to fix affordability. I do think in general, we had such a rapid escalation in prices that escalation level is no longer sustainable. And if it continued, that would create some even further affordability, and maybe a true bubble at that point that would have to pop. So the Fed's raising rates to slow that demand so that it doesn't create a huge bubble, and so that it can get back in balance at some point.
yeah. And again, people, again, they make it the same sentence, right? How affordability crisis, housing bubble. And back to kind of point number one, everybody wants it to pop and suddenly magically affordability is fixed in an instant, in a month, in a quarter. And what I've been trying to help people understand is I think the far more likely outcome is that over the next 2 or 3 years, rates will generally come down. I believe prices, again, nationally speaking, are basically boring and flat, 1%, if anything. And then we have wage inflation. I believe certainly average first time homebuyers' wages were going to go up much like the 1970s. I think wages, 5% will be, you get 5% wage increase for 4 or 5 years. That's a heck of a compounding. And I think housing generally slowly gets to be more affordable when you stop these crazy run-ups. Rates are down almost 1.5 points in 8 weeks or 10 weeks. And then if you
Yeah.
get 3 or 4 years of wage growth,
And the
magically
other thing is,
affordability is
even if
better.
we don't have wage growth, because I think it's going to take some time to come back, but again, it depends on what sector you're employed in, right? But I think generally speaking, one of the things that I'm seeing a lot of talk about in mortgage news daily, let's just say all kinds of news forums that I'm in that are related to financial news and mortgage news, is that the government and many large banks that are working on loan programs, they're really targeting affordability. So they're coming up with, like we said they would last year, new programs to help people to
Exactly.
get into houses even though they can't afford them. So they might be really low rates, but instead of teasers, they just get a better rate because their, wage is under the median, or, down payment assistance, 100% financed properties. And so the government's trying to fix the crisis, the affordability crisis, with mortgage programs that'll help kind of fill the gap until wages do get up to where they need to catch up with where prices are if prices remain flat.
Yeah. And then the last thing about affordability crisis, again, we talk about and wages, price, and interest rate. There's actually a fourth variable, supply. We could actually encourage the building of affordable homes. Now, generally speaking, these will be smaller. Maybe it's 3D printing, maybe it's this. I don't know what it is, but there is a fourth variable that nobody ever talks about is, you know what? If we actually created more of this stuff, it would be cheaper. So again, there is a fourth variable that can affect the affordability crisis that nobody talks about. It is supply. We need to do better, and that's usually handled at the local or state level. But if you really want to affect the affordability crisis, go build some affordable freaking homes, people.
Right. And there are government programs that are incentivizing us to develop. I'm developing multifamily properties in Dallas, and we've got two, key programs that are basically incentivizing building. And one is giving you a larger loan to value with supplemental loans that come in that reward you for green housing, energy efficiency, and paying prevailing wages. And so they want you to pay those prevailing wages to keep wages high. They want them energy efficient. And if you do that, you get tax credits, you get better loans, better rates, and higher funding. And so the government is trying to tackle this from many different angles, to your point, that a lot of people don't talk about. And that's a promising thing.
Yeah, no question. So again, I totally agree. We have affordability crisis. I do think there are four metrics that can be played with, and they are best done all together. I think a housing bubble with the vision of it popping is unwise. Certainly not probable. Possible, sure. But yeah, I think that and then when you connect them, that's really where I get like my skin crawls. It's like they're not connected. Stop it. So Anna, where can people find you?
Love it. You can find me here every week. You can find me on social media at Anna Kelly, REI Mom, and reimom.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much.